How was Scotland?
It was amazing. Yeah, so I was up with Hannah. It was Hannah's first time that far north as well, which was exciting in itself.
Whereabouts in Scotland were you? I'm gonna try and get
We
up
were
on the
like
map.
in Findhorn, which is like just sort of east of Inverness and north of like the Cairngorms on the coast. So not too far from my grandparents. I got to see my grandparents.
Oh wow, you were north.
Yeah.
Bloody hell.
That's proper. Like, I mean, it was cold as well, and I really wanted to like try and dispel any ideas that Hannah had of, you know,
Miserable, freezing Scotland.
Yeah. But
And then it just lived up.
yeah, it was quite cold, and the weather was all.
Was it sunny at least?
There were moments of sunny. We had one day in particular that was like just beautiful blue skies for most of it. I'd say the most common theme was just constantly changing weather. So the Monday when we went to see my grandparents, and that was like my first time seeing them in ages and Hannah's first time seeing them in person. But that day was just a constant cycle of it would go from snow to like beautiful blue skies in a matter of minutes, honestly. And it was just
Bloody
like
hell.
on a cycle, like sort of Groundhog Day kind of vibe. To be honest, like that actually probably was quite a good way to get to experience Scotland. Kind of saw it in all seasons in one day. Yeah, and it's just it's a beautiful part of the world. Like my grandparents, it was just so good seeing them again. Like just I I'd see them every half term or whatever growing up, but they're just so far away, especially down in London. And when you've not got like a half term every couple.
How long did it take you to get up there?
We flew up.
Whoa, bloody hell.
Yeah.
Understandable, to be fair.
Like it was incredible. I've never done an internal flight before, but actually just so smooth, like incredibly smooth. I think I might have mentioned that about Dublin as well. Obviously that's not an internal flight, but like because Dublin was such a short flight, I guess, and maybe the time of day we went, I think it might be better actually. Like you'd think that like the daytime in a way would be the busiest time. I think it's actually morning flights that tend to be the really hellish ones because they're the cheaper ones, I guess.
Yeah, so everyone stacks up for them.
Yeah, I guess so. I'd be really interested to know how that comes about. Like, is it that morning ones they tried to make cheaper because they wouldn't otherwise expect them to be busy, but because they've made them cheaper, they become the busiest time? Or is it that actually it is a time that people expect to be like that people choose to pick? You know what I mean? But I don't think it can be that because otherwise the price wouldn't be so cheap. You know?
I think as well there'll be an element as well where like people be like, oh, I want to make the most of my days off. So if we get the travel done in the morning, we've got the whole like if we land by like midday or whatever, or early afternoon, we've got the rest of the evening. Whereas if you're like, oh, I'm taking off the Friday, and I'm taking off a week's holiday or whatever, and we're only setting off at like 8 p.m. on the Saturday, it's like, well, you could have had that whole Saturday on holiday rather than that whole Saturday like waiting around. So I imagine that most people, I know I'm like this, you aim to do get there as soon as possible and leave as late as possible, which means that, especially like with the bank holidays, that Friday, like that Saturday morning flight, or that Friday morning flight, super busy, and then like the Monday night flights, super busy because everyone's just trying to get as many hours out of their holiday as possible, I reckon.
Then you'd also expect those times to be most expensive, whereas I swear often they're also the cheapest flights.
I guess it's who you're flying with. I don't know if it's just like Ryanair or just like cramming as many like budget flights as possible. I guess because people who are willing to pay more, it's that isn't it, there's probably those factors as well. It's like that trade-off between like being uncomfortable and having the inconvenience of early morning, therefore it's cheaper, versus people who are like, oh, I'd rather like have a more relaxed day or whatever, and then they pay more money to go in the midday flights. Yeah.
I can't recommend midday flying enough. It's just a much
it's the way to go
experience, and like we still, I guess because it's a short flight, you can afford to do that as well.
How long was the flight? Like, were you up and then you're down straight away?
Minutes. It was a longer flight there than it was to Dublin.
Oh wow.
Yeah. I mean, it is a way up. Like it's really quite. And the crazy thing is as well, just because I wouldn't be me if I didn't take this opportunity to rant about our train service. It cost us about the same amount to get a flight up to Inverness as it did for me to get back home. I last went home by train, which is probably like what, half the distance, and isn't a bloody flight. like like that just seems so topsy turvy to me. And the fact, like, I swear, like, the government like announced that they were going to have a load of like tax reliefs and stuff like that, or internal flights, because the aviation industry was struggling so much. It's like, doesn't need to be any cheaper to fly within Britain. Like, fucking do what you can to make trains cheaper.
Yeah, just build the train networks up, please.
Yeah.
I had like a nightmare with the trains. Since we last spoke, went to King's Day, and then we had I had like the quick turnaround where I was also going to like a group holiday with some colleagues from work, and that was in Torremolinos down in Spain. And the way it worked out is I couldn't fly directly from the Netherlands to Spain. I had to fly from Amsterdam to Manchester Airport, and then I had to get from Manchester Airport to East Midlands Airport, and then fly from East Midlands to Spain. And getting a train, it was 3 trains, I think, 3 trains in a bus to get from Manchester Airport to East Midlands, and they were all just the worst trains. East Midlands Railway is just tragically terrible, and it's like, it's so obvious. Like, I think that privilege of like living in York and you being down in London, the LNE, like that route that goes like the north route, I don't know what it's called, but the one that like LNER and stuff runs on, is like actually like genuinely quite a good train journey. It's fast, it connects like good locations and stuff. And then as soon as you try to go east west or do any movement that isn't London, any movement that doesn't include London is just fucking terrible. And it's just the trains are shit, the times are shit. Like, it's just such hard work. Like, all of Friday, not last Friday, the Friday before, all Friday was traveling, and I was a vessel, you know. I wasn't present. Exactly. I was just, my body was going through the motions, and I was just numb to the world, trying to get from point A to point B.
So it's the modern version of all roads lead to Rome. It's like all train lines lead to London, you know. Like,
and if they don't, then yeah, like, fuck them.
If they don't,
they don't deserve any funding. How long were you up in Scotland for then?
Like from Sunday to Friday. So we had like 4 full days there, and got a chunk of the Sunday and the Friday as well. And that area all around Findhorn's just like absolutely beautiful, like beautiful little like old sort of fishing village kind of vibe, I guess. It's got like Findhorn community next to it, which is like the world's largest intentional community or something like that. Intentional communities are like sort of communities set up with a kind of social purpose, I suppose. Like they're set up with a kind of
what you mean, like in California, where like loads of, is it California? No, Florida. Like in Florida, where loads of old people go to live together. Do you mean like that?
Nah, more like California is probably a better example. More like sort of like systematic version of all of the kind of cults in California. like all these communes and all that kind of stuff. Like I think it's quite a Germanic thing, I want to say. Like, I swear I was reading about it, and like it seemed very like European, like these intentional communities.
But the biggest one in the world is in Findhorn.
Yeah, apparently. Like, I think that's what my parents said, but I'm now.
Okay.
I think I read that somewhere as well, but yeah, don't quote me on it necessarily. But yeah, basically, like they're set up with a Findhorn community, which isn't the same as Findhorn Village, but it's just flow out of it really. It's sort of set up with this social, environmental, and I feel like there's another one. Yeah, social, environmental, and I suppose a sort of political kind of like.
It's a bit of like a hippie commune.
Exactly that.
Right,
yeah,
I've got
that's the top line kind of description. So it's great. It's a lovely little place. All sorts of like buildings and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, really friendly people, I imagine.
Yeah, just a sort of like friendly vibe. All sort of look a bit like hippies. Anyways, that's cool. And then grandparents just live essentially in the middle of like or like on the edge of beautiful old Scots pine woodlands.
Oh.
I just like I spent so much of my childhood there, so it was just a real sort of blast from the past. And my grandparents used to live in London as well, so like kind of got to talk a bit about London and all that kind of stuff.
Did they do an escape to the country type thing? Like they were living in the London smog and were like, nah, let's get almost as far away as possible.
Yeah, sort of. Like, I mean, they're sort of they were going back to like so my grandpa's from Dundee and my granny's from King Kingusie, I think, which is like not too far from Grantown, which is where they're from. They're literally from Grantown, which I just think sounds like something from Balamory or something.
Yeah, my grandparents come from Grantown.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
it's kind of
amazing.
brilliant. But yeah, so it was more them sort of returning home, I guess. I think maybe they
Mm,
just had like that idea that I mean, like they did say actually that they kind of when they were thinking about moving, they went up to Scotland to sort of scout out places, and they weren't sure at that point. At least that's how they were describing it. But as soon as they were kind of like looking around, they kind of felt that real pining for home, and they knew that's what they were kind of going to do. I think.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's sort of that was like lovely as well, and I also got to see my uncle, and again, first time for Hannah seeing him. Yeah, my uncle and aunt, and my uncle is he's like this sort of Scottish nationalist kind of one who I've probably mentioned, whenever like Scottish independence comes up. Not that that's as big a debate now, I guess.
Mm.
Maybe he wouldn't be happy with me saying that. But when Scottish independence was coming up a lot, like he was like often my sort of reference because as a source of lots of sympathies for that cause. He's all
Mm.
into his like tracking the family history and basically proving how Scottish we are. Apart from apparently he did like a DNA test.
Oh no.
This is going to be one of my claims now.
Oh yeah.
You go back, I think it's like 3,000 years.
That's quite a significant chunk.
We've got some Arabic in us apparently.
Incredible. I mean, 3,000 years ago, that doesn't surprise me. Like, it's that's a good chunk of time, you know? I think people could make their way across a rather large expanse over 3,000 years. It's a cool claim to fame to have.
Will people be forgiving if I just tried to claim that one now? Like it's got a bit
I
of
think it's so buried in the past. It's almost like being like, yeah, if you go far enough back, we all come from Africa. And it's like, yeah, we do.
yeah,
But
yeah. All right. Maybe I won't be able to pull that one out.
I don't think you'd be able to get a second passport based on that one, is all I'm saying.
Oh,
You know
that's
what I
a shame.
mean?
Yeah.
Anywhere specific? Or like was it just like the general
Like you
region?
said, like yeah. So what it is, it's like I think it's called like a Y-DNA test, and it
Mhm.
works by like you can trace like one lineage or the other. So he was tracing like all through the father's line, because in
Okay.
theory you're sort of tracing the family name as well a bit, and it can basically like you get the direct line that way, but you also get moments in the DNA where the DNA sort of mutates.
Mm.
And it can kind of mark those points, and so you can also see people who kind of come off, who track off from that line,
Oh, that's
or
interesting.
something like that. I might be
Mm.
butchering that explanation, but
Mm.
essentially, yeah, you
It's not a science
go
podcast.
way back, and from one of these lines that splits off 3,000 years ago, you get to like a load of contacts in like I think he said Yemen was one of them. He did send me the chart, and I actually still need to look at it. But yeah, I'm pretty sure like Yemen and places like that. So
Nice.
it's pretty interesting. But
That is interesting. I would be interested to do something like that at some point. The part of me is like, do I want some company to have like my genetic records and everything? But another part of me is like, oh, but it would be really interesting to just. The thing is, I just know that I wouldn't have anything particularly interesting. I don't think like. I'm sure like you, there might be like a pleasant surprise somewhere, or like really, really, really far back. But I don't think I'd have anything interesting north of 3,000 years. I think it would all be like Germany, Europe, England type energy.
yeah, all this stuff.
So,
It's kind of hard to. Well, yeah, no, I guess like there can be some surprises. I suppose in some ways, like the more interesting stuff, he also does like all the like probably his real passion is like looking at like historical records and stuff like that, and literally trying to map out the family tree.
that's always cool. Like finding like people who did weird rogue things in your family's past. You know,
Yeah, that's the thing.
finding that there was a pirate in your family line or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I think they're all fishermen pretty much. But
Yeah, for the most part, it's like, oh, they were farmers and peasants for thousands of years. Then there were some
there's something
fishermen.
more
It's like,
human about it, though. I suppose you can get a bit more of like the
yeah.
stories out of that process, which
Mm.
it is very interesting.
I think I might. No. Well, checking the map, I do have you beat in terms of northernness, though. I have been more north than you this past week.
Wow. Really?
I've been, yeah, I've
Oh,
been up in Oslo.
yes. I
Oslo.
saw your what do you call them? Those Facebook snaps.
So-
Like an old man.
You're so down with the kids. It
I
was an Instagram story. Did you see it over Hannah's shoulder?
no, it was a Facebook story. I saw it as a
I
Facebook
put what?
because my
Oh, maybe I
uncle,
accidentally uploaded it to Facebook as well. I
I
don't think I
definitely
meant
saw
to
it
do
on
that.
there. Yeah, unless it just
And now I've revealed myself to also be the boomer, accidentally uploading Facebook stories.
Yeah, that's sick. I would love to go to Scandinavia. That's one of my aspirations.
Can strongly recommend. Like Oslo, just it's a beautiful like coastal city. Loads of like really interesting like architecture and just things to explore. It is a little bit expensive, but the reason why we went is we've just looked at like where like cheap flights like off the bat, just like where can we fly to really cheap in the next 2 weeks or whatever. And I was to and from Oslo was like 30 quid,
No
like
way,
30 quid there,
really?
30 quid back. So if you go at the right time of year, or if you just get lucky with flights, and I think it has fairly cheap flights quite often, the amount of money you spend getting there kind of negates the amount of money you spend like having a beer or two or
Yeah,
whatever.
because that's what everybody says about Scandinavia. It's one of the things that like always put
Yeah,
me off a bit.
I wouldn't ever say like go and have like a big crazy rager out there, like no big nights out and clubbing and stuff, but you don't really feel the need to because you spend all day like exploring and stuff, so you can just have like a beer by the fjord and you just feel like, I don't know,
Drinks in the
relaxed.
park? Can you have drinks in the park?
I don't know what the laws on I think they were quite strict on public drinking, to be honest.
Really?
But again, never felt necessarily tempted to do it because there's enough.
Yeah, good point. Sorry, that's me. That's the Brit in me.
Plenty to do, and it also helps that the exchange rate is like the numbers are big in Norway, like because it doesn't use the euro, it uses the krona, the Norwegian krona, and it's like, I don't know, like 70 krona to a pound or something like that. That's not right, but it's something like that. So it means that when you're looking at like a menu and everything's like a couple of hundred, you just kind of don't really think about it too much, and then you can worry about your bank account when you get back. It's really hard to just keep like a running total in your head. So, but it's one of those places where like if you're there, you don't want to be like budgeting. You want to be experiencing stuff. But I'm surprised that you had. Well, I'm not that surprised because you were in Scotland, and Scotland gets a bit of a battering from the sea around it, I think. Whereas Oslo's like much more sheltered. But we had like really nice weather. It was like 13, 14 degrees, clear blue skies the whole time. I got a little bit of a touch of the sun. I don't want to say it was a full sunburn, but it kind of was.
I did catch the sun a bit, even despite the weather.
It's when you least expect it, isn't it?
It definitely is. Also, useful to note. Like it obviously can be warm further up. Like the hemisphere. But I think we were just really unlucky with the weather, to be honest. My parents had been up there like the week before,
and had they had it dreamy?
Yeah, it was like beautiful blue skies and all that kind of stuff.
What was Hannah's takeaway on Scotland? Was it her first time like
Loved it, to be
doing
fair.
Scotland at all? Yeah.
Done like Edinburgh and Glasgow and that, and I think Aberdeen when she was really young.
I think you need to experience like rural Scotland, don't you? Like village Scotland to
Oh yeah, real Scotland.
Edinburgh's its own thing. Yeah, like what people call real Scotland. Yeah.
Definitely, like certainly like the Highlands and all that kind of stuff are like, yeah, it's kind of its own distinct thing, really, in a way.
Did you do a little bit of fishing like your forefathers before you?
Nah. We walked along the River Spey like by my grandparents and saw people doing like the fly fishing and all that. Apparently it's like, I think it's like world famous for salmon fishing and stuff, although the salmon haven't been quite as coming lately. But I think that's like a wider problem. Like salmon are pretty fucked over.
Are you a seafood person?
I don't eat fish.
Oh,
I would love
to,
like, fish is like one of the things that I've been most tempted by, just because I think
you wouldn't dabble in pescatarianism.
Yeah, well, I don't think I can, just for moral consistency. But I think there's things like fish and chips. I feel like I'm missing out on like a cultural icon by not having fish and chips. That sort of makes me sad. I feel like the idea of fishing itself as an activity sounds quite fun, but I just can't
Would you be able to do that and throw them back? Is that like ethically?
Thought about
Like,
this. Not that I've ever come close to fishing. I've not really had the opportunity hasn't come up, but I've thought about it
yeah.
in theory. I
You
think
need to be
probably
prepared.
not. I think it's actually pretty
Mm.
fucked. In fact, I tried reading about it as well, and like I think it is still just pretty messed up. Like you basically
Right.
like if we were like the fish, there's some giants like fishing for us or whatever. It's like having your gums ripped apart and then just tossed back.
Oh my God.
Like
Yeah, and then it's just like, oh, be free, and you're just there like,
I think for a lot of them, like they end up okay, but like there's like a really bad survival rate,
mm,
and like I think in part that's to do with like if you have really good technique, I think maybe
mm.
it's all right. That was one of the things I read, but even then, the amount of
But obviously, if you're a complete beginner, you're not going to have amazing technique, are you? So
no, probably not.
you can't like ease into it. You can't ease into being an ethical fisher.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. So
You have to fuck up a couple of fish along the way.
yeah, so long story short, probably not going to happen.
Probably not.
But I do, I romanticize it a little, and
Mm.
I love the idea of coming from a line of fishermen. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, that is quite whimsical. Yeah. I mean, end of the day, you could just essentially all it is you go to somewhere really peaceful and stand either by or in some water. So you could do that without the fishing
Well, it's
part.
basically birding, isn't it? Like I guess I already get those kicks from birding, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's probably the same level of kind of like peacefulness
Yeah,
and
same
just like
principle, I think.
the loud and the quiet of nature. Just with a little bit more kind of like activity to keep your brain somewhat stimulated. And with birding as well, say down the line, because I think this is like a thing that dads use. Fishing is a thing that dads use so that they can have some time, quiet time, you know? So they go fishing. They go on a camping trip with the family, and they go fishing, and they take the kids down by the water. But then they're like, right, you need to shut up because otherwise you'll scare the fish,
Yeah.
which is a lie. And then they have some like peace and quiet time, and their kid sits like quietly by, excited by the prospect of like not scaring the fish.
Yeah.
I think you could do the same thing with birding. You could like take your kid birding and be like,
Definitely.
okay, and it's more true because it would scare the birds. You
It's
could be like,
true.
you need to shut up. Otherwise, you'll scare the birds. Here's some binoculars, and we'll spot some birds.
I'll store that one away. I'll bear that one in mind for
Yeah,
for future.
birding is ethical fishing.
I mean, the fishing's not going to happen. I just got to stay consistent on that.
Yeah, maybe we can do some virtual reality fishing down the line.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that's a lose.
It's less in nature, isn't it? You kind of lose a bit.
Yeah, that's just called a penguin, isn't it? On Oslo, sorry, just in case we're at risk of moving on from that.
Mhm.
Have you seen Worst Person in the World at all?
No.
Now you've been to Oslo, it's well worth watching. It's kind of like a rom-com. I don't know, like it's sort of like a rom-com or like a kind of coming of age, but coming of age in your 20s rather than as a teen sort of film.
That feels like kind of what I'm doing.
Yeah,
so-
yeah, exactly. It's like very much
Sounds relatable.
us now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about a woman in her 20s, like, and some of the relationships she has, some of that sense of lack of direction, all that kind of stuff. But also in the way that a lot of rom-coms are love letters to a city, it very much feels like a love letter to Oslo as well. You get all these beautiful shots of Oslo, and like, to be honest, like, yeah, of the sort of Scandinavian cities, in a way, it probably been the one I thought about least. I think maybe I don't know why. Like I just I think in particular Copenhagen, I just thought about a lot. I think my parents went there.
Yeah.
Probably sparked something. But yeah, so I probably hadn't thought about Oslo as much, but it's almost bumped it up to the top, I think, especially now with you having talked about it.
What was the movie called? Sorry, Worst Person in the World.
Yeah, Worst Person in the World. It's fantastic. It's like, it's just one of these films that like,
now that I've been, it's definitely gonna like tickle like the nostalgia because it had such a nice time there and I've made so many like lovely memories and stuff. And like now it's gonna like, it's definitely one of these places where sometimes places just like get a little bit of you, don't they? Like a little special connection, a little bit of place in your heart, and then you see some media that kind of romanticizes it, and you're like, oh.
100%. It's one of those. It's a heart pang kind of film, just because of the sort of the nature of that whole existential angst, I suppose, of being in your 20s.
There were several places while we were there as well that we were like, oh my god, this would we need to set like an indie movie here. Like we're talking along the lines of like there are like some beaches on one of like the like peninsulas, and we're like this would be the kind of place where like say someone had like a complete midlife crisis and then just decided to go off grid, and then you could just find them there. Like, you know, look, one person knows where to find them, and it's this little beach on this peninsula in Oslo, and they go and find them there. There's like the perfect setting for it. There's just all that kind of like, you know, you've got the sea, you've got the seabirds, but the seabirds were surprisingly quiet. I'm not sure what they do there, but like compared to going to like Scarborough or Whitby or any English like town, as you know, like it's just seagulls screaming all the time. In Oslo, like it's a massive like fishing industry, so there's like fresh fish like being trolled in daily and everything. But the seabirds were just so calm and peaceful. Like there's plenty of them around, but they just didn't make any noise. So they've clearly got some kind of witchcraft going on.
It's just all that well-behaved Scandi behaviour and the comfortable social security package, which means they don't have to fight for fish.
Yeah, that's what it is. I think quite a fun whimsical feature you'd like there as well as I think anybody would like is there's this bell across like the docks, and you can go and ring the bell by like pressing a little foot pedal. And the law behind the bell is that obviously Scandinavia, there's a lot of mythology. Part of that mythology is there's trolls in the woods and stuff, but the law goes that trolls are like scared of the noise of the bell, like the vibration scares them away, so you ring the bell to keep the city of Oslo safe from the trolls, which is quite a fun little. There's lots of little. It's an interesting place because I think at first you might go and you'd be kind of expecting more kind of old style architecture and stuff, but there's a lot of very modern buildings there, and there's a lot of what first seem quite brutalist buildings there. Like the town hall is very like angular. It's very just like rectangles and stuff. But when you actually like go and look like closer, there's all these like secrets in the city. Like there's all these like murals and like there's loads of clocks everywhere for some reason, and there's like interesting doors and like hidden patterns and shapes and like gargoyles, and it's like, oh, this gargoyle is what, you know, the joke goes that the reason the Norwegian police don't ever need to do anything is because the gargoyles are doing all the hard work protecting the city from evil and all this kind of stuff. So there's just a lot of like fun little like Scandinavian lore, and I'm quite interested to go do some other Scandinavian cities and see if they've got like similar themes running through them. Yeah,
I know that like did you ever read the Moomin books and that kind of stuff? Like
I didn't. I saw them in the airport when we were leaving, and I was like, "Oh, are they Scandinavian?" I didn't realize they were Scandinavian.
yeah. There's sort of, they're Finnish, but I think she was like Swedish Finnish, so yeah, already got a bit of pan-Scandinavian appeal there, I imagine. And they are trolls, but like nice trolls.
Oh, nice trolls, friendly little trolls.
Yeah, that's like, I think anyway. Yeah, like it's Moomin Troll is the name of the lead character, if you can call them that. But also at the same time, they are just one of these things that are inexplicably in like all gift shops and everything. I think they've just kind of got a lovely aesthetic, like beautiful drawings. So clearly got some kind of a mass appeal just on that alone, because you do just get them in like, I don't know, art gallery gift shops and stuff like that. Like they're completely unrelated to anything.
Not saying that the art style is questionable, but just to continue to saying that like there's that cutesy art style. There's a lot of there's a lot of art in Oslo, and a lot of it's modern art, and a lot of it's like questionable modern art.
Sure.
Like, interesting, but like I'm not sure I get it. So you'll have like places full of Moomins, but also boxy, thick-thighed women or whatever. Like, there's an interesting like collection of artwork going on in the city.
Risk of just reeling off films now. I've got another film for that. There's a film called The Square, which is about the modern art scene in Stockholm. So I'm imagining very, very similar. All that kind of like Northern European kind of upper middle class kind of classiness.
Yeah.
Self-perceived classiness. And it's by the director who did Triangle of Sadness, which had a lot of buzz around it recently. It brilliantly sends up all of that kind of all of that kind of scene. I don't want to sort of. It's more just it's worth watching basically. I won't go on a whole sort of
Yeah,
spiel.
that's a discover it for yourself recommendation, I guess. Yeah, nice. I don't know a good way to tangent off into the very confusing, I guess, questionable art. That's a good tangent, isn't it? Speaking of questionable art,
It works.
let's talk about Why by the pop group.
More of something else entirely.
Ronan, this is your album pick. Would you care to explain like why you chose this week? Was this the soundtrack of Scotland, and if so, why?
I did try playing it to Hannah, and I can't remember the exact words, but it's something along the lines of, "Why would you listen to this? This just makes me feel uncomfortable."
My main takeaway, like if we just want to do like at the top of it, the headline takeaway is: do not listen to this album if you are feeling even remotely anxious, because it is pure. It is like anxiety personified.
Yeah. So I think that's a fair description. So to give a bit of context before we get into the meat of it, I suppose, before I even sort of begin describing what the album is, I should start with the fact that this has been on my mind as an album to pick for some time.
Interesting.
I didn't want to do it as like a first album, but I did consider it. I thought that might be really just diving in.
Very deep end. It's okay because we're now like this will be episode 21, I think.
Yeah.
So that means we're deep enough in now. We're at the point where, you know, you can do some deeper cuts, you can do some weirder moves and shapes and see what happens.
So that's my thinking. Yeah, I definitely wanted to wait until a bit further in, but also the thing that suddenly necessitated picking it was that Mark Stewart, the singer, died just a couple of weeks ago. This is a little bit of an homage, an homage. Like, how would you say? You know, when you say it's one of those, you know, these words that come from French. I never really know how to actually say it, because when you just say homage, it doesn't sound right in
homage in Englishman's mouth.
Yeah, exactly. And
I've never been able to say French words without butchering them.
If you commit to it too much, that sounds wrong.
Omelette de fromage.
Yeah. It's a fromage.
It's a fromage to the lead singer.
But yeah. Like I think it's worth celebrating him, celebrating a sort of certain era of music more broadly, I suppose. Like this kind of, you know, like it's probably come up along a lot on the podcast. I know I sort of talk about it a lot. I get this sort of partly from like the era my parents came out of. It's that sort of post-punk era where there's a lot of musical excitement and sense of possibilities, and also, as is a bit more explicit on this album, a similar sense of a combination of political frustration, but also perhaps like political radicalism kind of comes out of that. So a bit of a mix of despair and kind of perhaps more hope in some ways than like the era we've got now, arguably. Although like perhaps it's shifting, I think it's up for debate. But the era we've got now, or that we certainly had for quite some time, was defined by a sense of a lack of vision. It's complete and utter like. And that's the whole capitalist realism thing, you know, like this is just the way things are now. It's some people might like it, some people might hate it, but it's just reality, and there's no sense of alternatives. Anyway, so it's a very specific point in time in that respect. Timeless in another respect, in the sense that I do not think at all that it has lost its abrasive edge.
No, I was surprised to see that it was from 1979. Like, because I didn't see the year until after listening to it.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah,
like you say, it hasn't lost any edge or intrigue, or it still sounds, well, I mean, it sounds completely unique, really. At least to me, I'm not as tuned in, wired into this kind of genre of music as you might be. Is this one for you that is the pop group a band that you've kind of followed for a long time? Then is this like one that you've inherited from your parents, or is this one that you came to later?
Yeah, so I got this from my dad, but I definitely also came to it later because even though I think my dad did listen to them at the time, it's not one that I'd say I at least sort of knowingly grew up listening to or anything like that.
I'd be kind of worried if someone did play this to a child regularly.
Is that child abuse? I don't know. Like,
You definitely, not necessarily abuse, but you're definitely fostering some confused emotions in a child. I think if this is their lullaby, like
yeah. I guess I can sort of talk about that as well, actually, and then sort of segue from that into describing what the sound of the music is a bit as well, because essentially it was introduced to me, and this album specifically, I guess, like I haven't so much listened to the other one that they released at the time, and I think they've released another one more recently. But this album was introduced to me by my dad, I think, when I'd already got into all of like the Bristol scene, you know, Massive Attack and sort of Portishead and all that kind of stuff, and sort of later on Tricky. And so I think like my dad knew I was into all of that, which to be fair in turn probably sort of came from my mum and dad. But knowing that, he was like, well, this band is, even though it's really, really very different, is in so many ways a precursor to all of them.
Yeah.
They came out, you know, they came out of the Bristol scene 10 years earlier. It's that similar melting pot ethos of Bristol, and also really big sort of through current that joins them both is also B sounds, very much dub production going on here. In fact, the
very much
Dennis Bovell, the producer, was like himself a dub musician, and this was the first album apparently that he produced on that he wasn't a reggae or sort of lovers rock album. So very much like a sort of a connection between those two scenes, even though sort of sonically when you first listen to it, perhaps not immediately noticeable how much there is in common. Although what I would say is it's appropriate that I picked Tricky on this podcast because I think that there's probably the most similarities between that Tricky album in terms of its sort of dissonance and all that kind of stuff. And even down to the fact that I found out Mark Stewart actually helped Tricky produce that record. So I think he hooked him up with the studio, apparently.
Yeah.
He also, some of his vocals appear on the track Aftermath, which was a mad discovery because I'd always thought there's like this one particular line that has an inflection that's just exactly like Mark Stewart from this album. And I thought maybe Tricky's doing a bit of an homage. I didn't, and I thought maybe it could be Mark Stewart, but at the time I couldn't find any information about it. But now I can confirm his vocals are on that track.
That's very cool.
So that's all a bit of meandering ramble. What is the sound of this album? It's complete and utter motorway pileup.
Yeah, that's a great way.
Jazz, dub, funk, obviously all of that punk energy. Psychedelic rock or like acid rock. I don't know, like a bit of that stuff thrown in. It's just this complete and utter collision of different sounds. In particular, like a lot of very sort of dissonant sounds that are then vaguely anchored, although anchored probably suggests too much stability. Vaguely anchored by the rhythm section that sort of really pumps through and is at the core of a lot of it and allows for some seriously just out there shit over the top of it. I think that's like a good enough initial,
like in
normal meandering style. Louis, what were your initial impressions?
I think Car Crash covers it nicely, but like it also feels a bit. I feel often Car Crash is used to describe things that are like a disaster, and I don't think this album is a disaster. I just think it is a pile up on the motorway in terms of, like you say, all these sounds thrown together. And it is one that you could definitely. I can understand Hannah's kind of confusion when you were trying to show it. It's not one that you can. It's not easy listening. Like this is definitely like you've got to be in the mood for something that's gonna try and test you a little bit. But ultimately, I did come away like feeling positive about, like, I did enjoy the experience of it. I think, admittedly, there were a few times. It's probably a good thing that we rescheduled this episode recording because it took me a few, like, there's certainly, I think everyone's probably like this, but I definitely get, like, if I'm not in the right mood, it's really hard to listen to the wrong kind of music. And this, especially when you're like going into discovering something new, anything new, you need to be in the mood for it. And sometimes you just want to listen to like stuff you already know or whatever, like comfort listening almost. This is like the next step up from that, because it's like stuff that you don't know and stuff that is kind of just like screaming in your ear with various instruments, but in a really interesting way. It's hard to talk about this album. Sound like I'm trying to sound positive because I feel positive about it, but it's hard to talk about it without using words that have negative connotations, like screaming and crash.
Wailing is, which I don't know if that's much better, but I think wailing is kind of like the term I'd use.
I had it on in kind of like in the background while I was working today, and there'd just be moments where I'd just be like completely brought, like my attention is just like grabbed by just like a loud noise that happens. But I think, like, just going back to my point earlier about being surprised that it came out in 1979, and just like your descriptions of it being like a precursor is really interesting, because it sounds like an amalgamation of sounds that would come afterwards almost. Like, in a way, the fact that it came out when it did and it came out before all these other things is like it sounds and feels like it must have been so ahead of its time. Like, I can't imagine like trying to wrap your head around it when it was released compared to now with kind of the context that surrounds it. Because it's genius on the level, because it's genius on the level that you'd need to have like a natural sense of these kind of genres that you're compiling. Because like you say, there's funk in there, there's jazz in there, but it's really like punky, it's really grungy, and it's really experimental, and at times it feels like a bit industrial as well. And it's like how the way it flows between it all, it's never, I don't know, it is abrasive, but not in a bad way.
Oh no, like I think like abrasive is almost at the core of it. It is, and I think that notion of struggling to play it as background music, I'm sure would delight them, because it is designed to create that sort of jolt to consciousness, I suppose. It's the musical antithesis of like Muzak, or like the kind of elevator music, or
it is
the music that plays in the shop that sort of fires you just enough so that you'll buy the extra like smoothie. Like
this is the polar opposite of Harry Styles, basically.
Well, no slight on Harry Styles either.
No slight on Harry Styles. We like Harry Styles, but
I mean, I'm like, as Hannah well knows, I hate him because I'm deeply jealous of him. But no slight on Harry Styles, but it is.
Yeah.
Like, Harry Styles is kind of, it is made to sit nicely on the ears, and it can be enjoyed whilst paying attention to it 100%, but it also very nicely just slips into the background. This is
very immediate,
very conscious rejection of that sort of music to a large extent. I think that's like there's two sides to the political element of this. One is some of the lyrics, which do, I think, sort of like occasionally touch upon, very often seem to have political themes, although it's often a bit more abstract, I think, in this album, whereas like next album, for example, has that other track which I mentioned to you. I don't know whether you had a chance to listen.
I did, yeah. I gave that one a listen.
We are all prostitutes. Everyone has their price. Like, that's a bit more explicit, I guess, in its political charge. This does still have all of those kind of political themes in the lyrics, but it's as much the music itself has that sort of political purpose in its attempt to hold you awake, like in its attempt to kind of throw you out of a feeling of kind of and into a sort of like an angry or a paranoid sort of state that's fitting to the times. This was like Thatcher had just got into power, or was coming into power like later that year. I've got to get my dates right with that. Not too sure. But it's a very specific moment in British political history and world political history, really. That sort of political anger was kind of warranted, and perhaps still is warranted. But the music itself is sort of doing that, and like I do think there's something else as well going on with the way that rhythm section then sort of gives you just enough to kind of like be open to that, I guess. Don't just immediately shun it. There's something about that kind of rhythmic core that sort of sucks you in.
Yeah.
But is itself still kind of jittery and a little bit uneven. And also at the time, place that at the fore would have itself been an almost radical act, because really it was only in the kind of 70s that rhythm was beginning to become central in Western pop music, or just in sort of Western music in general. Like, rhythm throughout the classical era, and then in a lot of like the pop era, is ultimately secondary. It served like melody, I think. As I think increasingly now we're used to the idea that rhythm might be the driving force of a song. You think about like hip hop being like the biggest genre and stuff like that. I think like a lot of us are a bit more intuitively comfortable with that notion, but I think at the time, place rhythm so centrally was also in itself a sort of radical act, or it was at least in keeping with the forefront of kind of music. Whereas I think what they were revolting against a bit was where punk had become just repeating of old musical cliches, but louder. So you're just taking the same three chords that have always been done in rock and the same kind of like same rhythm, and just sort of running away with that. Whereas that was the beauty of post-punk, and I think pop group are a perfect example of this. There was a moment of kind of take from all of these other musical influences and the musical influences that they saw as being most sort of progressive, the most exciting,
and I guess the most against the grain as well, like the least mainstream sounds possible. Like, obviously coming to it now, a lot of the sounds you hear in it are very familiar, because a lot of these are like the jazzy elements, for example. A lot of those sounds we've become very familiarized with, like the instruments and the melodies and stuff. Like, those sounds have come right into a lot of like hip hop, for example, which obviously is just like completely prominent in the mainstream at the minute. But obviously back then, these were the countercultures. Like, everything on this album is counterculture genre. Like, there's
I think that's exactly it.
Yeah, there's nothing on there that would have been anything close to what was getting radio hits back in that period. And obviously I don't imagine that anything on this album was ever played on the BBC.
Yeah, it's hard to picture it, at least, I think.
Hard to picture this.
John Peel might have done. John Peel, who probably also like talked about a bit on this before, but like did always champion these kind of alternative sounds, and was on Radio 1, which, to be honest, you probably wouldn't even so much nowadays. Although we do have Radio 6, which I suppose sort of does that. But even Radio 6, I don't think quite tends to play stuff like this. But I'm sure it would do. But yeah, I think because the other thing that it's doing here, and this the kind of like that Bristol melting pot idea, is that a lot of these genres that they're drawing from are also black genres, but it's even within kind of black culture, it's not the sort of diluted, distilled kind of black culture. It's the sort of radical edges of that culture. So free jazz is just one example, but even like funk, there's often like this dichotomy, and again, you can question it, but there's often a dichotomy sort of put up between like funk and disco, or at least there was at the time in the 70s. So funk was seen as like the true black art, and disco was seen as the kind of diluting that for wider audiences. I think that is probably a questionable analysis, but within this context of like which are the more seen as the more radical forces, it's sort of drawing from all of these kind of very radical forces.
I'm just thinking about how like it's truly fascinating how you get these, like, I want to call it trickle down funkonomics, which is a terrible
Sorry,
term, but I'm
I'm,
going with it.
I don't know what it means yet, but I already love it.
Where, so, like you're saying, funk in this kind of period, along with these other genres, these kind of fringe, counterculture musical pieces, right? And then you look at where we are now, where I think like Bruno Mars is going to be my example, where an incredibly mainstream artist like consistently produces what is like pretty, you know, you can't really argue that a lot of his like biggest hits are very funky, like funk inspired, like more mainstream, obviously a bit more sanitized funk, but the way that just what I was thinking about is in terms of the trickle down funkonomics is that you clearly have this like lineage between, and I think this is the case for many counterculture music pieces, is you get some very fringe artists creating art, and then this is listened to by a small community, a niche community, but that inspires members of that community to make their own art, and they bring in their own ideas, and it kind of passes down the line until these niche communities become less niche, or like certain ideas get like stolen or transferred across into wider audiences. And it's like you could probably just draw like a really interesting kind of like family lineage tree from the most grungy experimental like funk music, like proper like origin like funk, all the way to like 24 Karat Magic or whatever that Bruno Mars song is. And you can see, because obviously Bruno would have listened to like funk music when he was younger, like growing up with it. Donald Glover's another example. Like there's certain genres you grow up with, listening to, that your parents would listen to, and they found it. Maybe they found it by, flicking through a vinyl shop and finding a dusty vinyl that has some really interesting sounds on it, and they fall in love with it. Or maybe they went to a gig, and that gig was being played by an artist who grew up listening to whatever. Like, it's interesting that you get these really radical ideas, and in a small span, even the most what you would consider like unlistenable, out there, outrageous music can find itself diluted all the way into pop music, into the charts in a short amount of time. And I know that there must be ideas that the pop group like championed back in their heyday that have somehow trickled into real pop music now. And I'd be really interested to know, not you know what I mean by real pop music, is in like pop music that is categorized as pop music versus an act that call themselves the pop group despite being as far removed from it as possible. And it'd be really interesting to see how like certain artists feel about that, because I think certain artists would feel very like kind of, yeah, like I love that that's how music works, that there's this trickle of ideas, and it eventually does evolve into something that more mainstream artists can use and mainstream audiences can enjoy. And I think it's something that like I remember Damon Albarn talking about, is how he just hopes that when somebody listens to funk at the sanitized end and gets into it, it inspires them to track back up the tree and go back to the roots and find the interesting stuff again. But I imagine there are other artists who might be like very kind of jaded by that process, by the fact that they might have been pioneering sounds 30 years ago and being alienated for it, that now someone can waltz like into the charts and do massive numbers with almost like what they might see as like a bastardized version of it. So I just think, trickle down funkonomics is an interesting like element of the music industry, and I'm sure there's like parallels in other media, but I can't think of many off the top of my head other than like use of, I don't know, camera angles or something like that. But you don't get that same kind of dilution and evolution of ideas and themes that so radically swing, like in such a short period of time, radically swing from niche to mainstream and then back again. You're like, rock music is no longer the chart topper, and all the rock music has kind of trickled back into that niche again. And maybe in another 30 years time we'll get a we'll be downstream of whatever is currently cooking in the underground.
Yeah. No, I think that's. Oh, there's so many interesting ideas in there. I don't even know where to where to begin. I think it's one of. I think you're probably right that music feels like a particularly. I'd never really thought about this, but it feels like a particularly extreme example where you can see these forces taking place. I'm sure it does happen in other art forms, but it feels like you very, very visibly see these rapid changes from niche to mainstream, I suppose, as you're describing. And like I think on one level, sometimes I think I don't want to like knock that process, because I think that there are artists that and the process can happen very quickly. So for example, with funk, I was thinking as you were talking, like, not that I know him too well, although I've like started listening like a little bit more of him. Like Prince emerged from the 70s, I think. Prince was basically taking funk, but for whatever reason just completely broke through with funk. I guess just a funk mixed with a pop sensibility. And it'd be easy to be kind of cynical about that process, but I don't think anybody is about Prince. People just generally recognize him as a genuine sort of genius. So I kind of want to say that to first of all, to acknowledge that actually there is arguably just this process of people taking a style and using it sort of in good faith, but just happening to do something with it that just chimes to such a large audience. But then, just because I feel like with the pop group, I have to, it's often the pop group through which I think of some of the political language I talk about music with. It's like a theme that's come up a few times on the podcast, this idea of like music's power to sort of take you out of certain ways of thinking, or like all that kind of stuff. Like this sense of like the sense of possibility that can come out of music. So on picking up on that theme, just because it seems appropriate, and having caveated it with my little sort of acknowledgement that good can come of mainstreamification or trickle down funkonomics. All that side, I think that this is also like a process of capitalism, at the risk of sounding a bit pretentious, but like I just always loved that I had two lecturers at uni that described this phenomenon within capitalism, but they had both totally different angles on whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. Basically, the process is that capitalism can always co-opt the countercultural movements into itself, because it sort of thrives off this endless subdivision into kind of individual niche interests and all that kind of stuff. And I had one lecturer who was like, and that's so dystopian, essentially. Like he didn't use those words, but that was the gist of it. Like, God, how alarming! We have no possible hope of fighting this system, because any attempt to fight it will be sold on a T-shirt.
Yeah.
And I had another lecturer who was like, well, that's precisely why capitalism is the ultimate system, because it can allow for all these differences in perspectives and all that kind of stuff.
There's room for it.
Looking at that like musical process through that lens, I do think that you get these really radical movements musically, these new sounds that just are so fresh and exciting. I think perhaps they just lose that power with familiarity, and that's less capitalist conspiracy, more just sort of human nature, I guess you could say. But B, there's also a bit of like money is smart and notices when something new has come about and finds ways to monetize it. Often that's by basically taking some of the elements that are most digestible, sort of repackaging, often keeping that countercultural branding. And so that's a more like, it's not that that's a conspiracy, it is just following the money. But that is a process that happens time and time again. Something that feels like it has radical potential is very quickly identified, and people work out how to make money out of it. Sometimes it will lose that political messaging, but often it will keep the exactly the same political messaging and have very overt political messaging, but sort of become deeply undermined and sort of washed out because it's just being used as a cash cow. There's some of my muddled thoughts on trickle down funkonomics, which I am obsessed with.
I guess as well it links in with this idea that like, you know, maybe at first you monetize the niche audience, and then somebody who is part of that niche audience is like, I think there's definitely this like natural evolution that happens like subconsciously that leads it towards being more monetizable. Because I don't think there's obviously like some very I don't know, business-minded, driven people. Let's be, you know, polite and call them that. Who will be there immediately, like, okay, how can we? This is a thing. This is a new thing. How can we turn it? How can we like milk the utmost cash out of it possible? But I think most of the time, what usually happens with these kind of more niche counterculture movements is that you'll have people who aren't necessarily consciously driven by the goal of like monetization, but are there going, I'm inspired by my favorite artist, the pop group, and then they go away and they try and make their own music, and in the pursuit of success change the formula a bit or do whatever they need to do.
Even just because they're more like pop minded, I suppose. Like you know,
Yeah.
they've got an ear for like a catchy hook, or they've got like, you know, whatever it might be. Like, or even like just like there's certain melodic moments on this album, on the pop group's album. It's like another band would have discovered that and really carried it out and constructed a whole song around it. Because these sensibilities do really come through. It's one of the other things I find very intriguing about it, do really come through on this album. So it might be like somebody listening to it.
They come through, but then they get like thrown to the side for something else.
Discarded immediately.
But like you say, like someone who is inspired by it or might sample it or anything like that, like you say, runs with that melody. Before you know it, you've got a more sanitized version. Before you know it, it's more monetizable. Before you know it, the cycle of being engulfed by capitalism continues. Yeah.
And like I do think that like when you understand it in those terms, though, actually like it can offer a healthy caveat to the more radical take on it. And you know, I think it's okay to acknowledge that these are often organic processes that would perhaps happen even if we were living in a, you know, communistic utopia without the money incentive. You know what I mean?
There'll always be a sanitization process before it goes mainstream, or like a natural. It's almost like I really wasn't expecting us to do such philosophical music.
Sorry.
In this episode, but like it's almost like a river running some jagged rocks smooth, like a glacier smoothing out a valley. Is this metaphor for the process, isn't it?
That's
like,
another great metaphor.
Like at first you just have a few trickles of water that come through, and it's still very, you know, rough and ragged and ready, but gradually as the stream builds up and the stream gets wider and broader, it smooths out the riverbed, and as the riverbed gets smoother and wider and broader, more water can then flow through it.
Even works with the trickle down funkonomics label.
Trickle down funkonomics, and it even links into the word mainstream, which is now making me think: has this been like? This is definitely not fresh ideas, but it's fresh for us. So
I feel like this is well fresh. I think we can play that one. Well, whilst we're on, I mean, I do think that it's going to be the thing that we just keep on coming back to, which is that like ability, the shock of pop group. I'll also quote one of my favorites of comments on the album, which comes from, actually, is it on the album or is it might be on the song We Are All Prostitutes, but it's broadly on the pop group in general and the sort of impact they had. Nick Cave, the sort of artist himself, singer, has like an interview on YouTube, which I mean, perhaps you can link in the description. I can send it over to you. It's well worth a watch, just because he's got an incredible way with words. But he describes seeing the pop group for the first time by first sort of setting the scene. So he's leading up to that moment of being completely blown away by the pop group. As a precursor, setting the scene, he talks about he's just moved with his band from Australia so excited to sort of check out Swinging London and all that kind of stuff, and hear all of these
Yeah.
incredible new sounds that we had this image of London for. And they went to a gig that was just a sort of selection of local bands. And they were all this sort of like bubblegum pop, kind of like really sort of easygoing. He describes it as being, it was like being gangbanged by a pack of marshmallows, which I just think as a way with words is I just I don't know. I really wanted to be able to be able to throw that that quote in there.
I'm just curious, in terms of like when you put this album on, is it when you're in a mood not to be gangbanged by a room full of marshmallows? Like, what is the vibe that, like, when you return to this album, because it's clearly one that you listened to the pop group a lot. So what is the mood? Like, what is the? Because I'm not sure what mood, like, is. Yeah, like, it's not a dinner party, is it? Like, but it's also not. You don't want to be feeling sad because it just makes you feel worse. You don't want to be feeling particularly happy. I don't think. I don't know. What's the setting?
I think you probably had your finger on the pulse initially when you're like. I mean, it does follow on well from the quote, because I think why that quote chimes with me, as well as just being an incredible way with words, is because, you know, just occasionally I can get myself into that mood where all music does sound like that. You know, it sounds like the pack of marshmallows.
Yeah.
And this will almost invariably break me out of that, and so
it's like a splash of water to the face, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good description for it. I think it's similar to, I'm pretty sure I said the same about Tricky album, again, sort of creating that link there. And I was going to say that about when you were saying this album must have had some influences that then went on to have major success. Actually, Tricky is a perfect example.
Yeah,
that album was like a real surprise hit. I don't think Tricky himself was expecting that, and you know, that album is itself still has a lot of, you know, experimental qualities, but it was a complete and utter overnight success. But yeah, I think that's probably one element. I think it also just combines so many different kinds of music that I sort of love. You know, I love all my sort of funky stuff. You know, I love a bit of jazz. I love a bit of like post-punk stuff, but I mean, I love a spectrum of post-punk, but there is like a whole subgenre of essentially like funk post-punk. There were a lot of post-punk artists at the time that were taking this influence from dance music, basically, I guess.
Yeah.
And I love that because it basically satisfies my urge for that sort of dance music, and that sort
scratches that itch.
Something that just feels like a groove, whilst also satisfying a bit of an itch for, you know, like something a bit more dissonant, I suppose. But then also, like, I think, you know, because there's some of this funk post-punk stuff, less so the pop group, but there's some that's really not that dissonant even. I think there's probably just a bit of like, you know, it's sort of like, it's a homegrown British version of that scene, whereas like a lot of it's like American, I guess. So it also feels like it's just sort of drawing from a British scene, which I just kind of always like. I get that with like hip hop sometimes, where like I really enjoy hip hop, but sometimes I'm like, I'm not doing my country proud enough. I need to be listening to like,
and something that comes from closer to home, you can feel more of a connection with, and more kind of like a like pride of, I guess. Like, obviously you can only be so proud of something that isn't yours, but there's almost like this, like, like we as a nation have things that is interesting and exciting and challenging to the status quo. Yeah,
no, I think it's like you're right, it doesn't really make any sense, but then, you know, community is a sort of an emotional state rather than necessarily a rational one, but that doesn't necessarily make it any less meaningful or important, I suppose. There is something, it's one of the few things that brings out a sort of national pride for me. Like music would be one, like humor, I guess, like art just is one of those things that can bring out a sense of national pride.
Anything for me that like actively brings joy and enjoyment to people is like, if that's one of your cultural exports, then that you're onto a winner there, I think.
That's a key thing, actually, isn't it? It's when it's like a cultural export, so you feel like it's not excluding people. If anything, it's bringing people in.
Yeah.
It's like inviting people. It's saying, here, come join in this thing that we're sort of producing.
Like, my heart warms seeing like a comment on a YouTube video of like some British comedians going, "Oh yeah, like British comedians always make me laugh." And I'm like, yeah, that's good to know, good to see. I'd much rather stuff like that than like, I don't know, any other bad examples of people talking about, we get, as a nation, we deservedly get shit talk quite a lot. But I think when it comes to music and comedy in particular, like the international community does have a bit of a soft spot generally, which is quite nice. Apart from at Eurovision, where obviously we usually shit canned, but
well, yeah, but now
that's for reasons outside of music, isn't it? Really?
Now that we've been nice to Ukraine, we seem to have been getting
we seem to be back in, back in the good books.
Now. Oh, I think that's I think that's exactly it. It's the fact that it's a more inclusive form of jingoism. If you can have inclusive jingoism, then that's it.
So I noticed that so speaking of the moods being basically when you just need like a little bit of a sampling of some of your favorite genres all in one place, and B, sometimes you just need a bit of a musical refresh when you're feeling a bit like overwhelmed by the monotony of the sounds. I noticed that you do have one of the pop group songs in your Found True Dharma in the Sound of a Blue Llama playlist, which is a fantastic name for a playlist. It also looks like a fantastic playlist, just rummaging through it. But is Snow Girl in there to break up the monotony of the playlist, or is Snow Girl just in there because you just wanted to listen to it and that's the playlist you've had on rotation?
Yeah, I actually...
Is it a tactical insert?
So I already had Thief of Fire in there. To be honest, like normally Thief of Fire is like my go-to. I think Thief of Fire survives as just a straight up funky tune, like really funky tune. Almost got like a most kind of pop sensibility of most of their songs. Like for some, like She Is Beyond Good and Evil seems by far their biggest one on Spotify. I'm guessing that's because it appeals more to like the sort of post-punky crowd. Like it's a perfect post-punk tune, and it's still funky, but like it's maybe a bit more like funky. Whereas Thief of Fire is pretty much just like a straight up funk tune, really. Like it's funk with a bit of free jazz, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
But Thief of Fire normally is the one that I'd put on playlists for that reason. Although, having said all of that, that is also the one I tried to play Hannah, and she wasn't having any of it. But I'll try again at some point. Sometimes if I catch her in a different mood.
It's an acquired taste, I think. At first nobody likes the taste of beer and coffee, but you have enough of it, and eventually, you're like, oh man, this is one of the best things I've ever had. I think the why the pop group could be similar. I think if you're exposed to it enough.
Yeah, but my theory with Thief of Fire,
not like Stockholm Syndrome,
too much that now I don't see. But like I remember that one for me just jumping out straight away, just because just that bass line, like.
Well, not to like jump ahead, but I was gonna pick that as one of my favorite tracks off the album. So that one definitely jumped out to me as well.
But yeah, the other ones that I added was just in the process of listening to the album. This is the thing with the album. Like, just every time I listen to like different tracks can out. Like often they all just merge into one kind of like kaleidoscopic mess in some ways. But I guess as I've been listening more and more over the years, just every time different ones jump out. So these ones have just jumped out to me when I was listening, and so I just added them to my playlist because I really do just dump all songs in the playlist.
Yeah, just whatever you've got going on goes into the playlist.
Some kind of like some kind of cohesion can come out of, especially with the Spotify algorithm that seems to like when you shuffle it merge songs roughly together. You know what I mean? I don't know whether you found it as that.
Well, I think we've spoken about it before as well, where like you have your playlist, image and title, and then a bunch of songs in it. And I asked like, are the songs picked to fit the theme? And you're like, the theme kind of forms naturally. And in a way it does, because like I now feel like these tracks on this playlist embody the feeling of Found True Dharma in the Sound of a Blue Llama. Like it's like if someone's asked me, can you compile a list of songs to convey finding True Dharma in the Sound of a Blue Llama, it would be this playlist. You've kind of, and I think that happens with all of them, is that the fact that you're just kind of throwing things together somehow in some way, despite the fact that you can have quite disparate stuff. Although usually people don't really, because like obviously everyone tends to listen to similar kind of music. And I think when you're making a playlist of what you're listening to right now, everything you're listening to right now tends to be of a certain sound. So in a way, it kind of like naturally kind of is cohesive. But I think the pop group will always be a little bit of a curveball in any playlist that you make. Especially going from like the funky smooth sounds of De La Soul into some wailing, pop group wailing. But it works.
Oh yeah, well, like I think also, not to get too pretentious about, because we are just talking about playlist names here, but I think that does process reflect of like that process of seeing an order just because there's a kind of an order and a cohesion just because there's a name in it, does reflect the extent to which I guess a listener or a viewer, like basically an audience member's own participation is a central part in success of most kind of art, culture, like all that kind of stuff. Like it's often presented as if somehow you're just getting this kind of package that has innate value to it. I think that the audience members' interaction with it brings so much. It's essentially like, for example, with the playlist thing, it's essentially like an illusion. I think the sense of order that sort of comes out of it in my head is just an illusion. That doesn't make it any less real in a sense, because
like valid,
because that's the case with all, is using the playlist as a metaphor, not calling the playlists art. But that's the case with all that. I do love my playlists though, so yeah, maybe I should be claiming that.
They are art. They are art.
It's the modern art form.
Do you know why it's called Why?
I actually don't know. Nah.
So that can be a mystery for ourselves to look up outside of, and any listeners to some homework to go away and find out why it's called Why. I do just want to quickly say that I was really upset that the song 3:38 was 3:43 seconds.
That
really upset me.
Yeah.
I think I don't know if that's like it was always that length, and it's just one of those things where like the Spotify version has an extra 5 seconds for some reason, or if it is just the pop group did it on purpose to upset me. But it did upset me, so thanks.
What was the most radically disruptive thing they did on the album?
Yeah, like everything else was like, this is easy going, and then the fucking it's just like, why name one of your songs a length of time if it's not going to be that? Don't do it, please. It's just upsetting. But I'll quickly go through my highlights. Being Thief of Fire, definitely I think my favorite one on the track. On the album, but I really enjoyed Don't Call Me Pain as well. There was just something about it quite hauntingly intriguing. I don't know what it was. I think there's a lot of things about this album that are kind of intangibly enjoyable. Like, you can't quite decide why, and you would understand if you showed it to someone else and they were like, I don't understand at all. But it just spoke to me when it was on. And I think the boys from Brazil as well, actually. Don't Call Me Pain and the boys from Brazil were back to back, and I think both of them just clicked. So they would be my top 3 picks personally, is Thief of Fire, Don't Call Me Pain, and the boys from Brazil.
Cracking. Yeah, I mean, first of all, completely agree on Don't Call Me Pain. I think maybe it's that, again, talking of them having these pop sensibilities come through, that central horn hut is amazing. I really, also talking of like, sampling.
I think I'm just a sucker for a horn. every time we've done you've done an album pick and there's been a horn on the track, that's been my favorite.
Yeah.
So clearly, I'm just a horn. I'm sucker for a horn.
But there is something addictive about it, and it does work particularly well for a hook. And maybe that's some of like the hip hop influences, that because I feel like horns are used in like, I don't know, especially all that like tribe stuff, or like also Taylor Soul, and you know, anybody influenced by them. But yeah, I mean, that horn hook's just amazing, and would love to sample it at some point.
You'll definitely have to let me know if you do.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different moments on Pop Group that are ripe for diluting.
Oh, it's a smorgasbord for sampling.
Oh, it really
Like,
is.
it's just
It really
everything
is.
you could ever want in one place.
And it would just be, I think it's a cool album to sample. I do just think it's like,
It has cred. It has cred.
yeah, it's just obscure enough as well. Like, but you know, and also feels like post punk feels like it should be out of place on, say, a hip hop track, or you know, a dance track, but actually it's not as wild as it sounds. No, like I don't know, but yeah. So Don't Call Me Pain would probably be one of mine as well, and Thief of Fire. And then listening to it again, there were just so many different ones that jumped out this time. But just for consistency's sake, I'd probably have to say in the past I've always gone with Savage Sea, which is such a nondescript kind of like, because it's barely even got that rhythm section that holds together most of the album. So it's such a nondescript drifting of a tune. There's something about the discomfort that creates, and then only just to kind of pull all away that discomfort at the last moment with the most beautiful piano line. Like highly recommend just sort of like going back just that song, just for that piano line right at the very end, because it just sort of it's another example of where, you know, they could have made a whole tune out of that kind of part, or made a whole classical tune or something. I don't know. Like it's just such a beautiful, beautiful melody.
There are some like shocking moments of beauty in the album that just pop out.
Yeah, completely take you by surprise. I think.
Yeah.
I'll probably have to pick that almost just for that moment alone. But that moment has power, I guess, much because of the whole context that comes before it and after it. You know, like it's just this beautiful piano line in a Savage Sea. Is that is that too on the nose to?
Very nice. No, that's lovely. Very poetic.
Yeah. So I've got to make up a quiz now. Do you want to do the? Oh, actually, I've got something. We need a new section for listeners' emails. What would you call it normally? Like.
Oh, correspondence.
Welcome.
No, that's very formal.
Correspondence. And you need like
We can do better than
that.
that.
Correspondence.
Correspondence.
That can be the intro. Just my sister got in touch to say that they celebrate Guy Fawkes Day in Canada, or at least in Newfoundland, and they call it Guy Fawkes Day.
Really interesting. Okay.
Follow-up questions to that, but I'm not sure I ever got a response. But yes, I just because my phone did die, it's kind of been missing for a little while. Thus ends correspondence.
Yeah, we might need to rebrand that, but it'll do. It'll hold for now.
I think we're becoming a real professional podcast, Louis.
Yes. We're supposed to be coming up with 20 episodes in. You're supposed to come up with a name for your audience. So I don't think we'll bother with that.
Ronan's family, to be fair, does sort of.
Ronan's family, yeah.
There's to Alex for that.
So it makes it sound like a cult, though. Like if there's people, the Ronan family. They all live in a commune in Scotland.
Oh, cool.
It's time for the quiz. Do.
Okay, so.
No Bing.
Oh, sorry, Bing. I was busy trying to find some facts because I've not prepared this. But where, according to Wikipedia, and this comes from, it's referencing the Oxford English Dictionary apparently. When was the term pop song first used?
Was it like was it like when Henry VIII supposedly did green sleeves in the? Oh no, I've made the mistake of naming a historical figure that I should know, like the time period that they were around in. But I've always been terrible with like periods of time. But let's say pop music was invented in the 1500s. No, yeah.
I mean, it wasn't according to Wikipedia, but that sounds really plausible. I've had to actually look up what green sleeves is, which shows my kind of lack of. And you're right, you're right. Green sleeves is a 1500s thing. I don't know about Henry VIII.
Oh,
It's like 1500s or early 16th.
15th century would be like 1400s or something. It's around then, right? Like,
Let's have a look, Henry. Yeah, Henry. Oh God, no bloody hell. He was 1509 to 1547. There you go. Oh yeah, that would be 16th century.
there we go.
Right?
16th century, 1500, 16th century.
You'd say it, but that still confuses me. The whole,
Yeah, the whole like way round of things.
Yeah, thing. Yeah, it's me.
How far off am I?
Quite far off, but I mean, it's Wikipedia. It was 1926, apparently.
I mean that's like much more like plausible, tangible.
So what,
I think
what was the green sleeves thing?
it's the one that's like dun 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 dun. It's like medieval. It's like if you have like a generic medieval setting, whatever's playing in the background is usually green sleeves, and there's like a rumor or like a unproven theory that Henry VIII wrote it, but he probably didn't. So yeah. But it was very popular, hence why I thought maybe pop music might have been coined very, very early. You know, one of those ones that's just surprisingly early.
Yeah, no,
But
I mean, it
alas.
sounds incredibly plausible, and I almost sort of feel like I wouldn't be surprised if something like that came up. Also, that makes me think that I've got another thought, but it might have to wait for another podcast. Just on the way that music's sometimes used as like a signifier, like in the green sleeves thing being used just to indicate it is medieval times, and you barely even have to take in the music. You just hear the sounds. You know, it's the harpsichord or whatever they play on, and like all of it together. And you just know, oh, it's medieval now, and that's all that signifies, and you barely even process it as music. Like I had it the other day where I was fundraising at a dinner. They had like the most bland jazz in the background. On one level, it was just like, sure, it's background music. It's music to sort of, it is designed to blend into the background so you can talk over it and all that kind of stuff. But it was more than that. It was specifically jazz music because they wanted to signify you're at a classy event.
Yeah, it's like it's shorthand almost at that point.
Yeah, and so it's barely even music.
Shorthand. Yeah.
Like and that's not to knock the specific music that was getting played, but it's almost to knock the use of that music, I suppose. Anyway, that's a.
We'll delve into that deeper. We'll come back to that.
Okay, so I'm trying to look up facts about letter Y and facts about groups.
Okay, nice.
Oof. Okay, right. Because this is a political episode, look up group facts. Comes up with Child Poverty Action Group.
Okay.
So, ready for some hard-hitting child poverty facts? What percentage of children living in lone parent families are in poverty?
In globally or like in the UK?
Good question. In the UK, I think.
So, what percentage of children living in lone parent households?
I'm guessing this is relative poverty as well. You know, like where it's 30% below the median or something like that. I don't know whether you ever did geography, but that's me trying to recall my.
I thought in geography they just did colouring in and gluing and sticking.
yeah, that as well. That was most of it. Next question
let's
is
go.
what percentage of my geography course was colouring in.
I wanna say for the children in poverty, which is a really fun upbeat question. Let's go with 23.7%. That's quite high.
final answer?
I'll lock it in. We're in a bad timeline. I'll lock it in.
I think the fact that you said that and you thought it was high says it all. It's 44%.
Fuck me! Oh my god!
How insanely bad is that?
Oh.
Shocking. There we go. I feel like I'm proud that we've kept to the spirit of the album and included a political fact there. Yeah, for context, that was linked because of Child Poverty Action Group. That's the group in that.
That's the group.
It's really hard to find a fact about the letter Y. I don't fully understand this, but the first referenced fact on Wikipedia.
It's so sorry, but like when someone starts when a quizmaster starts their question with "I don't fully understand this," it doesn't fill me with confidence. Go on.
According to some authorities.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, no. I get it now. Sorry, I was getting confused about what vowels are. Clearly.
Okay.
Just okay. So everybody knows that I is often included as the sixth vowel.
Mm-hmm.
What a lot of people might not know, at least what I didn't know, that there's a seventh letter that's sometimes included as well. What is that seventh letter?
What the fuck? What?
I know. I mean, they've just thrown this one in here as well. It's not even like the key thing that they're saying.
R?
Final answer?
No. Yeah. R. Final answer.
Apparently, it's W.
What? I mean,
I guess like
oh.
white. You know, like when you get like, but that's the I. Oh no. What? Like the worst sound is that like?
Is that just because it's U twice
open?
and
It's like
U's a vowel?
An open letter, I guess, isn't it? Is that what
An
makes
open letter.
Vowels are like how they're used to get, but like, yeah. Anyway, apparently, it's literally just an offhand remark on the Wikipedia for the letter Y. But they were sort of interesting enough.
They were fun little facts. Did I get any of them right? I can't. No,
I don't think
I got them all wrong. All three wrong. Quite
fair,
wrong.
They were quite rogue ones. I don't think I picked them out because I don't think I'd have got any of them.
It's okay. I'll just be really mean to you next time I do a quiz.
I mean, I wasn't being intentionally mean. I just thought they were interesting.
They were interesting. They were good. I feel like I've learned quite a lot from today's podcast. You know, we've come away more philosophical, more political, and more intellectual. We've done the triple whammy.
The system and all that.
Yeah, maybe even a bit more mathematical somehow. But
where do the maths fit in?
Percentages.
Oh yeah, 20... yeah, that'll do. That's close enough.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for the album pick, because it's something, again, I'd probably never have even found it without you, and it is one that I'm glad I've now listened to, and it is one that I probably will find myself returning to, just of the intrigue of wanting to get more out of it. Because like the way you've talked about it today has kind of made me more curious about it. And clearly, it's the kind of album that every time you go back to it, you find a little bit more, few more nuggets of musical magic in there.
So yeah, certainly hope so. I'm glad you enjoyed it despite its best efforts.
Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. You can find us on all your favorite podcasting platforms, including Spotify, Apple Music, Google Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, etc., etc. We're also on YouTube and on SoundCloud. You can also, if you've had any thoughts or feelings about this episode, you can find us on Instagram at More or Something Else Entirely. You can email in at moreorsomethingelseentirely@gmail.com. Obviously they're quite wordy tags, so you can find our links in the description of this episode, as well as timestamps to jump around. We have timestamps for all of our episodes. Give the podcast a rating on Spotify. Maybe find one of the polls or the discussion points underneath the episode and give us some feedback. But yeah, thanks all for tuning in. Have a good one.
I think it's quite amazing. that you might break the law. But also you're a wonder in your own way.
The communists have nothing to offer but fat cheeks and eyeglasses and lying policemen. And the capitalists proffer napalm and money in green suitcases to the naked. And the communists create heavy industry, but the heart is also heavy.